Right, and then... See? We actually changed over to the Photoshop screen.
Beautiful.
So,
Professional.
already, we are half an hour ahead of the last stream, which is now unlisted on YouTube, so you can only watch it via the Discord if you grab the link.
I was kind of curious about that. I was looking back, I was like, oh man, I thought there was one last week.
Yeah, no, it got unlisted. Okay, right. That is fine. Who's going first? Who is going
I'm
first?
scared. I don't know how this works.
You just slap some art in the feedback channel.
No, but what if you're mean about it?
Oh, I am. That's part of the fun. I think is when I tell you that you're like the worst artist in the world and
Okay.
That's what it's all about. That's why we're all here, right?
Yeah, I think so.
All right, I've got a good one.
Okay.
All right, I can.
I haven't posted this on Insta yet.
Oh, we're ready.
And hopefully you can improve it. I've made a new rule that before I post something on Instagram, so I'll stick it in the voice chat.
Stick it in feedback.
Oh, feedback, my bad. All right.
And we'll do you
I made a
first.
new
We'll get you out of the way.
me.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Just so you're not sat there sort of sweating and waiting to be crushed. Oh, this is wonderful. What the hell?
I do environments mainly.
It's a nice environment.
Thank you.
Let's bring it into Photoshop. Wow. What's the story with it, man? It's kind of like Spirited Away-esque, isn't it?
Yeah, that's where I got the idea for the tracks, and then I imagine it's like in the future, and there's like a wind farm in the background, and the kids come out to this old train station on a little dinghy.
Oh. I just think I want more. The way you painted it, I think is fine. I think your painting is pretty good. I just want more storytelling stuff. So they've come out in a little dinghy. That's really cool. Currently, the child seems a lot bigger than the dinghy. In fact, the child is probably the part of the painting that could be painted better, right? Just in terms of the anatomy. Obviously, you're going for something pretty stylized, but
I'm so bad at putting the characters into scenes.
I think a big tell that you've done something wrong is if I make a new layer and I cover up the head, it's not all that obvious which direction they're facing, which I feel like they could be facing either way. We're not indicating much about their back or their front. You know, it feels like this arm could be doing something. Just think about the emotion that you're trying to get out of this. Is the kid in complete awe of what's going on? Is that the idea?
Yeah, I wanted him to like, I wanted him to be like looking, as if he's looking into the distance and he's like shielding his eyes from the sun.
Okay. Shielding his eyes from the sun. He's not actually looking at the sun, is he?
No.
Well, the sun, I'm guessing. I mean, he could be looking off over there somewhere. The feeling I get, and feel free to ignore this if it doesn't fit into the sort of story that you want. The feeling that I get is that you're trying to fundamentally contrast two ideas or concepts, right? And it's kind of like small versus big, or like cozy versus, I guess, expansive or something. We could use those words. And so when I'm thinking about making an image like that, I'm thinking about how every element can go into supporting this contrast and this idea. And so you've got some really nice things going on, like there's a lot of warm here versus a lot of cool everywhere else. You've got this idea that he is literally small versus something big like a cloud. So that's good. But in terms of his pose, let's think.
I think I should even use lines.
I
I don't.
I really, I mean, it's completely up to you what you want to use and what style you want to paint in. I think the lines that you're using are one of the more unique things about this style of painting, and I really like them. I
Okay.
really like these little graphic outlines on things. I think they're really cool.
Okay.
Maybe they're a little bit, unrefined at this point, and you could think about how you can make them just a little bit cleaner. But I would definitely pursue this a little bit more. This idea that you're mixing painting and line work, because I think it's wonderful.
It just, whenever I add it, it just makes it like it doesn't look finished until I add the lines. I don't know why.
Yeah, and it makes sense. And maybe the other thing that you're sort of leaning on in terms of visual style is, I assume you've seen a load of Ghibli movies. This is a Spirited Away sort of thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it is that idea of a gouache or watercolor painted background, and then the elements in the foreground that are being animated do
Yeah.
have line work.
They have the
That
lines.
is something that we relate to, I think. So that's fine. Let's destroy your character,
Yeah, get him out of here.
and then let's add him back in, shall we? I like the red. That's neat. But that's like again, that's a decision that you're making that is pretty. It's a pretty cool decision, and I don't know if you're doing it consciously or just because it's a cool decision. That red contrasting all the other cools in the scene, you know.
Yeah, and just the red lines always, like warm lines always look nice. I think.
I want to keep some of your original proportions in some way or another. There's his feet. But I'm almost imagining that he's so in awe that his hands are just sort of by his side, like they've dropped, and he's gazing off. But probably not like this, you know. I didn't mind.
Yeah, I think he's too small to like maybe communicate that in the scene, unless you're like zooming into it a ton. The silhouette might not read. I'm not sure. Kind of just looks like he's scratching his head.
Yeah, I think if you're
Right.
trying to get him to look like he's sort of looking out, he might well be too small. But there's nothing saying that he has to be doing that.
Yeah.
I think from far away a gesture can read quite well if we just leave it, allow it to. And this sort of arms by the side thing is kind of interesting because it's not often you see kids with their arms by the side. Could it be that he's like,
Yeah, that is
he's
true.
come here to, like, I don't know, he's adventuring, and narratively he's brought something with him to adventure. I don't know. This is the worst drawing of a child I've ever done. Could it be that he's come here to adventure and he's brought something with him, like a ball or a kite, and
Oh yeah, kite.
and he's so in awe that he's dropped it, you know. I don't know how well a kite would work, you know.
Maybe it'd have to be a ball. I'm not sure.
So,
It'd be hard to make a kite read.
some kind of item, and maybe it's still like in his hand, you know.
Oh yeah, you could do the string to his hand.
Yeah, but he's adventuring, and oh my god, he's come across this beautiful scene, and he's so in awe of it that he's dropped whatever he's holding. What else can we think about narratively? Well, he's come in a little dinghy. How is the dinghy moored to this thing? Has he tied it up somehow, or has he just hopped out, or? You know what I mean? 'Cause surely
I
if
don't
it's,
really think about it.
yeah, it's gonna float away, isn't it? I like that the dinghy's over here, because again, I don't know if it's a deliberate decision, but it sort of implies a sense of travel, that this is where he arrives, and then we're
Yeah.
traveling from the left side of the screen to the right. That's cool. But he's a little kid. How is he? How is he?
I might clean up those bushes. I don't know if I like them much. Bit scruffy.
Yeah, I think you could. He's like moored his dinghy somehow to something. You know, what is it? An actual paddle? I feel like the other thing that you're doing, because there's lots of, it's like a multi-layered contrast, which is really cool, is you've got small versus big, cozy versus expansive, old versus new.
Yeah, that is a big thing.
Yeah, so this is like
The
really old.
windmills are new.
Yeah, and he's part of an old sort of broken down world that he's living in, and he's looking at this really cool futuristic-y thing. So old versus new, maybe the dinghy is a little bit beaten up and like patched together, you know. I'd have to Google dinghies and look at what does a repaired dinghy look like. I imagine you can't literally just patch it together, but maybe you can. I don't know. But I'd be looking at things like that. What's the paddle made out of? Is it actually a paddle? Or is it like an old plank of wood? An old piece of driftwood that he's found, like a wooden board, you know. So again, you're just going a little bit further into that contrast of like he's scrapping bits together, and then here's this crazy futuristic wind farm.
Yeah.
Let's think about what else we can do to help with this. So another thing is that you've got these wires, these big cables coming along. Do you need them? What are they adding?
I
these
don't know. I was
clouds-
just thinking like leading lines, maybe.
Well, these clouds are already leading lines. I feel like if we get rid of the cables, actually what we end up doing is making this little island feel more isolated and like it's floating in the middle of this image and he's had to get to it.
Yeah.
Which I think is really cool. Whereas maybe the leading lines are just a bit too obvious and say that this is definitely connected to whatever else. But you know, you could still have those cables there. That's actually. Have you ever used a stroke effect?
No.
So if you use stroke, everything you draw has lines on it, outlines.
Oh, I've seen so many people do that, and I've always wanted to do that. Do you know Mayajin Lee on Instagram?
I don't think so.
Oh, okay.
But
He uses like custom shapes loads, and he does. Although actually, that's a different thing. But he uses that effect. It does look really cool.
I'm just thinking it's kind of similar to what you're already doing. So, you know, it could be that there are cables on this thing that
Wait,
are like, broken or
Oh,
whatever.
I'll just look up a video after. What's it called?
Yeah,
Stroke.
so if you double click any layer, I'm only screen sharing Photoshop because I only have one monitor. But if you double click any layer, it'll bring up the layer sort of effects panel, and then you can click stroke and then play around with that. Yeah.
I've never used that before.
That's the kind of thing I need to get my business brain on and make like a YouTube short about.
Yeah.
But yeah, you could still have those for sure. You could still have those cables, but they're broken down, and then we're getting something even more sort of low tech. Do you think he comes here often? Narratively, you know, do you think this is like a little? We could play into that idea and think that he uses this place to sort of escape the rest of the world, and he's set up
A little den.
like a little den, you know, and he's personalized this space.
I need to get in there and detail out that whole train station more.
Well, it's just thinking about what it's being used for story-wise. So yeah, is it a little den? Maybe he does fly his kite. Maybe it's his little hole, and so he's put like posters up. Does he do like little children's drawings and he hangs them out? Yeah. And you can think about that and think about the story, and I think that would be really, really, really awesome, because you've got such a sort of, it's really nice, and I think it already has a sense of narrative, and just playing into it a little bit further, people are gonna start to sort of attach themselves to this idea and this kid, and it's like childhood, and everything's all scrappy and handmade versus like this mass-produced wind farm that's super futuristic, but it's kind of sterile and boring.
Yeah.
One thing I'm thinking about that I don't know if it's a great idea, but I want to try it. Is let's get rid of Mega Cloud. And instead, let's get the idea that it's big versus small. You know, is it like boy meets wind turbine for the first time? I don't know how a wind turbine looks or works. But
It's nice because you can silhouette it. You can just make it a light silhouette against the sky.
and it can be really sort of simple, but
Yeah.
this is almost like the idea of, I don't know, I get very sort of English teachery and metaphory, but it's like First Contact, isn't it, with like a big alien structure, and I think that's what you could make a statement about, or you could tie into the visuals at least, is this idea that again everything's very scrappy and homemade and recognizable and very human, and actually he's coming into contact with this super futuristic thing. And again, you could just do the white silhouette, or you could put your signature line.
Yeah, the lines.
But maybe that would be an interesting alternative to the God, words escape me. To the big cloud, you know. It's actually this idea that you have a couple.
It'd be nice to have them reflecting in the water too. We like that.
And it's almost like this. It's really close, and it's abandoned because it's right next to a wind farm or something, or the idea that the wind farm is getting closer to the shore, you know. And so it's like these two worlds meeting in the middle, whereas this is like they're kind of far away from each other, which is fine. It's just two very different messages or stories or narratives.
Yeah.
And that's the fun of this kind of explorative painting, is what is the story? What are you trying to say with it?
Yeah. Originally there wasn't really a story. It was just kind of like, I just thought it'd be cool if I just wanted to do an underwater train track just to see if I could do it. And then I just thought, what if there was windmills in the distance?
That's how some of the best paintings start, is like that, yeah. Maybe if we're going down this, I think something I'd like to see a little bit more is the idea that there are imperfections in this sort of a thing, and so actually maybe the roof is like a little bit slumped, you know, and there's some of these roof tiles on the floor or whatever. How much of this is actually letting light through. Like if it's an old abandoned thing. I don't know. So again, sleek, machined, perfect, symmetrical, many. And then there's this few imperfect thing, and it's broken down, and it's a bit grimy, but it's almost very cozy and lovely, and it feels more human than this, which feels more machine and inorganic.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's a cool, really cool painting that you've started doing, and you played around with that kind of a thing. And I think you've stumbled across quite a nice little story that you could describe a little bit further, you know. So
Yeah, I think I like the windmills being closer.
I think it helps with the idea that, I mean, and maybe you should actually get some images of people looking up.
Yeah. I could take I should take a photo.
Yeah, but you know, you could get this idea that his arms are by his side, he's dropped his thing, and he's just in awe of this like mega structure. Look at Simon Stalenhag's work. He's got some beautiful paintings of very similar things. It's like children playing in front of like a giant alien super reactor.
Got the electric state on my desk actually currently, so that's pretty nice.
Yeah. To have a read completely. Oh my god.
Yeah, he's good.
EMC
I love Stalenhag.
3D. EMC 3D in chat.
What's that?
Wow. Yeah, one of my favorite game art streamers. Oh, Fish Flops is in chat as well. Right, very good. Okay. Yeah, I'll put this in feedback.
Thank you.
I think whenever you're painting anything, just find out what's at the core of it. It's always going to be some kind of contrast, probably. And what can you do to feed back into that? There you go. Who's next? Should we go
I'll take a
all
spot if
the
nobody
way?
else. But
Do you want to be next?
sure, unless somebody else is dying for it.
No, I doubt it. Let's... Bonk. Bonk. Is this a chroma core thing?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I've had a few people I've been giving chroma core feedback to. We love it. We love chroma core.
It's a fun time.
Okay. And the idea that she like summons this big spirit thing that's in an incense burner, and it can possess her, allowing her to fight with big gloves. You wanna advice on pushing shapes, and you're just playing around with ideas.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, this is still like relatively early on. This is all just kind of stuff from playing around with ideas yesterday for the most part. So
That's fair. I think, and I don't do that very often. That I'm seeing this relationship between things that are purple and things that are related to the spirit, and you've got that sort of strong design language where it's almost like anything that's this purpley color is spiritual in some way. The thing that feels a little bit odd to me about the design is the idea that you could take away the spirit and she would still have these enormous, insane, giant gloves.
fair.
like those aren't those. I mean, maybe they are. It feels like those aren't spiritual in any way. They're just big gloves, which is really kind of odd.
Yeah.
So it might be that the initial, and forgive my scrappy doodles.
That's all good.
It might be that the initial design, and I love the fact that she's got these like huge trainers on. Is actually she's just got these big sort of floppy sleeves, right? and we love floppy sleeves, and she still has the hair over her head, and she still has that cute little thing. And it's only after the spirit is taken over that these floppy sleeves have big spiritual hands come out of them or something.
Okay. Yeah.
Because
It's not a bad idea.
yeah, I think that the interest in the design is the difference between normal and possessed.
Mm-hmm.
And so the more we can sort of hype up those differences, the better.
Okay. Yeah.
I also think that the incense burner is one of the most interesting things that you've got going on.
Yeah.
Incense burners are so cool. I mean, and there are so many of them from so many different cultures and whatever else.
Yeah.
And we can picture that this is whatever we want, and you could really think about the design of this thing.
Mm-hmm.
But at the moment, the incense burner is just here, and there's no indication of how it's attached to the girl.
Right.
It feels like you're hiding it because it hasn't been designed, if that makes sense.
Yeah. That's fair.
That's like a hero asset or a hero prop. That is the most interesting element that's going on. It would be like having. I don't have many pop culture references to hand. Let's have a think. It would be like having Cloud from Final Fantasy, and then not showing his giant sword.
Right.
At all. And it's like, well, that's kind of like a core component of his character that is really cool. So I'd make a
absolutely.
bigger deal of this.
Okay.
I
think part of what I was kind of struggling with when I was first trying to figure out how to integrate and everything was how to have it be something that's kind of like a more obvious part and like a visual part of what's happening without it kind of like getting overly cluttered or distracting or it's hard when it's behind the body already like that.
Yeah, I think it's about how it's held.
Right.
Especially considering that this is like a tiny little child. So let's imagine that actually we want to play up. So just like this, we want to play up whatever contrast you've got, and the contrast is small versus big.
Yep.
And that's a really cool contrast. So how about we have a really tiny girl, and she's literally with her big sleeves carrying around like a big incense thing, or it doesn't necessarily have to be an incense thing. It's almost like a big genie's lamp.
Yeah.
And it's a core part of her character is that she's always carrying it around with her, and it looks like it's quite heavy. And she's like lugging it around. Maybe she's got this huge thing, and she's sort of at the side, very happy about her big jar. Right. And then the demon thing. She is possessed. It is a demon, isn't it? This is going to come out and go inside of her, and you could even personify the jar itself. So I like to look at Pokemon.
Yeah.
And there are lots of Pokemon that are sort of inanimate objects personified.
Yeah.
Is it Rotom that's like an electrical spirit?
Yeah, and you can go into like different like washing machines.
Yeah, so you could imagine that actually the jar itself, when it's inactive, is still the demon, and the lid on the jar, depending on its position, is like a mouth.
Yeah.
Right. And she's carrying it around, and it's like her best friend is this like demon, and it can still emote even when she's just holding it. And that way you're going to get this huge contrast between tiny girl holding big jar, where she's doing the heavy lifting, to when she's possessed, where it's a lot more like the demon's doing the heavy lifting and she's the vessel instead, right?
Yeah.
So it's that.
I kind of like that.
I think what you've got's pretty cool, but it seems a shame that it's a demon stuck inside of an incense burner, and we don't see the incense burner. And I would just really push that and make that a big part of the design in the first place.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I think it's so interesting.
It was something that, like, kind of just as I was going through, I was like, oh, hey, this would be a neat idea, because I had been playing around with some ideas of having some sort of like big being behind her in the first place, but then it kind of like moved on in favor of the gloves, because like I that whole big versus small idea. And then as I was going through and doing this, I was like, oh, okay, let me try bring that back a little bit in here and see how I can get that to work. And I was also like, oh, okay, that also kind of brings a little bit more logic into her being able to like use these massive gloves like this too, right? Like,
yeah, that makes sense.
yeah,
But like I've changed this a teeny tiny bit,
right.
and it changes the personality of this demon.
Mhm.
Because I feel that the other thing that maybe isn't working as well as it could, is her personality's coming through.
Yeah.
But she's almost like one half of this character. If half the time she's possessed and she's not herself and she's the demon, like I don't feel like this has as much personality as it could. It's kind of this horrible, awful husk. Which, you know, that might be what you want. But I feel like it doesn't quite match the energy or the style of the character. I'm thinking,
for sure.
Again, I think some of my only cultural references, and I think, is it Kill la Kill? Is that the one? Or is it? I think it's Kill la Kill.
Is the one where like the clothing is like
and the clothing has like a little face on it, and it talks to the character and annoys the character. And they have like a relationship between them, and so you could imagine this stupid jar, and she's like carrying it around, and it's like, I'm not happy, or it gets really happy, and whatever else happens, depending on the scenario.
Yeah. So would you focus on the jar over having like an actual like kind of like spirit, like gaseous form for it like that behind, or
no, you'd have to focus on both of them.
yeah. I'm just trying to think, like, if we have like the incense burner kind of like having it like personified in there, would it then come out when she's possessed, that you can kind of see it like floating behind her, or still just kind of around
that's
before?
true, because when she's possessed, it might just sort of seep out and enter her, and then she's possessed, and so you don't need the gaseous thing at all. Or it could, you could have all three. You know, it could possess her, it could live inside the jar, but when it's really angry, it sort of comes out of the jar.
Yeah.
You could imagine that the lid of the jar could open.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, maybe this is how you do it, is the inside's all dark. Right?
Yeah.
But he's literally inside the jar.
Mm-hmm.
And it's quite a big jar.
Yeah.
But that's another stinky idea. It really depends the direction that you want to take it.
Yeah.
And he can come out, he's not very happy.
Yeah, like I still like the feeling of having like this big like dark figure looming up behind her as well. So I'm just trying to think how I would
Maybe she has the jar.
merge that in.
Let's think. Maybe she doesn't carry it on her front. Oh, which there? That there. I think the whole figure's gonna have to like lean forward.
Yeah.
But could it be that she has this like stupidly large jar on her back, and
Yeah.
she's got these big backpack straps or something, and so it's still on her back, weighing her down, and like, does she how is this supported on the back? She'd have to have. You do see those interesting sort of like Sherpa backpacks and things.
Yeah.
But again, I feel like this gives you more of an opportunity to design the interaction between the two characters, whereas
Yeah,
this is just
absolutely.
this thing sort of floating around. But if it's
Yeah.
on her back, then maybe, that's, for all we know, that if the thing opens and sort of pokes its head out, from back here, like that is 100% a possibility.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the main thing that feels off to me is the gloves.
Okay. Yeah.
But again, it depends what context they're in. Like if this is in some kind of anime world where everyone's walking around with different oversized bits of clothing, then you'd go, oh yeah, that's normal.
Yeah.
But it relies on that. Relies on being in a story where that's normal.
Yeah.
And not a construct of this thing.
Yeah,
some
no.
way. Because
Honestly, part of the inspiration for that was just imagining like in my head it's almost like a League of Legends thing, a top down where she's just running around dragging the giant glove hands behind her. Just kind of like flopping around in the wind as she goes.
And maybe she could, but I feel like you could get that same effect, but without the gloves itself. It could just be that
Right.
she's got really
Just
big
big
sleeves, and like those sleeves are the perfect opportunity for then when the thing possesses her, for the spirit's hands to go in the sleeves, and
Okay, yeah.
play about that way. Because otherwise, maybe you're fighting with too many different things. It's like, well, these are interestingly designed. Did she make these herself? Or were they gifted by someone else? Are they related to the spirit? And then you've also got the incense burner, the spirit itself. And it's like there are so many things going on, whereas you want them all to relate to each other in some way or another. So having the incense burner and the spirit relate to each other a little bit in a bit more of a strong sort of narratively connected way.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That would be interesting. But yeah, I think playing around with that would be cool. When it comes to these two versions, I think these are cool, but I would go big or go home. And you've got little things that aren't how can I describe it? I just feel like they're so small that they're not doing what you want them to do. They're not super obvious.
That's fair.
So like you want gas to be coming out of her mouth. Let's have gas coming out of her mouth. And then she only sprouts this second little horn thing when she's possessed, which I find to be really, really fun. I think that's so cool. Maybe that would be even cooler if she didn't have one to begin with.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So like her hair is very flat and very normal, I guess. And then she's possessed and two bits of her hair poke up.
Yeah.
But when they do that, I don't know. It feels like narratively, are you saying that the spirit? You could almost say that the spirit is like a big bunny demon or something, and these are little bunny ears or something.
Yeah, like I was trying to. The spirit, I hadn't had as much time to mess around with, but I liked the big, like, sort of like antenna, insectoid, whatever the heck is going on with going off the top of the head there, and I was like, oh, it'd be kind of interesting to kind of call back in that a little bit when it's actually her out there with her hair all of a sudden does that kind of split up there. Since I already had the big hair tuft going off the top to work with, I was like, oh, I could do more stuff here.
Maybe we can play up some of these other differences. So her hair's very sort of flat.
Yeah.
once she's possessed and these hairs are standing on end, you know, is the rest of her hair going to get a bit more
Right.
sort of wacky, like it's, you know, not floating, but a bit more crazy. And
Yeah,
then you get
absolutely.
the comparison between the two. Yeah, I don't know if we need those.
Yeah, those were kind of just me playing around with it a little bit because I was wondering if the hair tufts were too subtle at that point. But
I think the biggest thing that you've got is these floating bubbles,
yeah,
and maybe you play them up.
hmm
Overlay. I don't know. You know, she's charging
Mhm.
up, and the bubbles start rising more dramatically than they were before.
right.
Plop 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 plop. But yeah, it feels like, you know, how much heavy lifting are these tiny little bubbles doing, and are they necessary?
hmm
Is she using her legs for this attack? Maybe. But maybe all of that power is concentrating just in those hands, and so actually the rest of her body isn't as affected.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was mostly just thinking because I feel like it would take some amount of leg strength to be able to
To
lift those
them up.
anyways.
Yeah, true.
But I don't know from
I just think you've got so
just
many
visual interest wise if it's adding too much down
well,
there. It's
it's
distracting
these
from the
tiny
rest.
tiny little shapes that are sort of hovering about everywhere, and you're adding in more tiny little shapes.
Right.
You know, could it be that you just have something like a bigger thing sort of bracing her legs, or even if these big hands, I was gonna say I'm almost imagining that these big hands are not gloves and they are like demonic hands,
Right.
in which case you could also say that when she powers up, there are these sort of demonic legs that also happen. But I don't know.
hmm
Yeah, I think you got something really cool. It's just playing into what you've already got.
Yeah.
These incense burners. I have a soft spot in my heart for incense burners. I grew up and I went to a Catholic high school,
Okay.
and we always used to have mass, and the incense burners, they are the coolest things. People swaying around incense, but I mean that's another thing to
Yeah.
bear in mind is, and maybe see ideas.
hmm
Is most incense burners are swung around on a chain,
Right.
and could it be that this is like a really big incense burner that's got a demon inside that she's like dragging around, and then when she gets strength, or when the demon takes her over, actually this is the weapon, so it contains the demon.
Okay.
And then when she's
Yeah.
strong, she can like spin it around like an Olympic hammer, you know, or whatever
Yeah,
it
yeah.
is. I'm gonna
Interesting. I kind of like that.
screenshot this. I there are so many different sort of branching ideas that you can go with.
Yeah,
and maybe
absolutely.
it is that you want to go with the original one. That's fine. But yeah, making a bigger deal of some of these individual parts that I think are really interesting is going to be important. Yeah,
I
yeah,
appreciate
I
that.
had maths
Thank you.
at school. Tom, yeah. Let's have a look. Who's next? Who's next? We got some people that dropped things in for feedback 2 days ago. I don't know if they actually want it to be live on stream, so I think I'm going to avoid it. Let's look at phase work. Plonk. Okay, you said for the crit stream, you did it while on holiday, on your phone. You didn't get to use any of the fun things you're usually used to. I'm interested to know what the fun things are. You just want some feedback on whatever seems a little bit off, maybe shading or colors or proportions. The hands seem a little weird. And then we got an image that you used as a reference here. I think immediately the thing to me that feels off is the angle of the head. So what I'm picturing happening here that I would probably want to expound on or make even more obvious is the idea that the character's looking down and they're sort of looking up at the camera, but it might be that actually you almost want the mouth to overlap with the nose or whatever. But, you know, it could also be that I've made the character look way too far down. Something like that. Whereas I feel like what you've done is you're showing a lot of the top of the head, which is correct because the character's looking down. But then I also feel like you're showing a lot of the face, right? So as the character turns more down, that area that you've got for the face has to foreshorten a little bit more for it to make sense. So let's think about it as a cube or a cuboid. So here is the head. It's a cuboid with a little smiley on it. And then as it starts to shift down, and then down again, it's got to be the case that as this part gets bigger, this part gets smaller, to show more of the top of the head. So that proportionally, I think you just need to sort of squish all this down a little bit. Actually, no, squish it up from the chin. In fact, can we just do that? If this works, I'm going to be very impressed with myself. Even that, I think some of the forms, like the mouth, are not wrapping around as much as they should. But that squish feels much more natural to me compared with how much of the top of the head we're seeing. I don't. Are you still in voice chat or in the stream? I don't know. Maybe you've gone. That's okay. That is, I think, what I would recommend. And then we're going to have to compensate by also bringing everything else up. As well. Probably playing around with where we've got the ear. Notice how flat that ear is on the side of that head in the ref. And we're seeing some of the other ear as well. Lighting wise, you're lighting from the right, and so you're getting this shadow, cast shadow of the nose. Maybe should be more clear, although it's possible that I painted that. But you, like, this whole side of this cheek is also going to be in shadow. This brow is pretty heavy. Like, she's looking angry. And so how much of that is going to be in shadow as well? Let's think. Let's merge them. Okay, so that's your original. That's my changes. It's possible I've gone a little bit overkill with the angle. I think the other thing that's going to happen with that angle is actually the eyelashes are going to come down rather than up. So when they're like this, let's do our best to diagnose the problem in a digestible way. So it's almost like if we have a flat plane, you're going, that's the shape of an eye, and therefore when you draw the face in perspective, so a flat plane in perspective, you're just drawing the same flat shape but in perspective, when actually we need to understand this eye to be, you know, a sphere within a pocket that has another 3D form over the top of it, and that way when we see it in perspective it's still a sphere, but the angle of some of those lines has changed, right? So that fundamentally the silhouette or the shape that the eye is making changes from that to like that, you know. So it's yeah, I think that's what's happening. Is the eyes just seem to be sort of stretched over the face from this angle, and they're not going to do that. They're going to come up. Eyelashes are going to come down and out towards us as a viewer. Going to get all sorts of folds. We're going to see much more of the inside of the eyelid, because inside of the bottom eyelid, because she's looking down. No matter which way she's facing, her iris should be more or less a perfect circle. Which it is, but I think the pupil's getting a bit squished. Again, that's probably my fault for squishing it. So, oh, let's just merge these before and after. I think the hands are fine. Maybe they're a bit high contrast compared with other areas of the painting, like the face. Same thing with the hair, like you're really blocking in some hard lines there that are pure black, but I think that's fine as well. It's just a matter of taste, really. Right, I'm going to reply in the feedback channel with that. And then we'll go on to the next person, who is the Art of Sane. You want to do yours next? It's getting a bit late. Sure thing. Okay, we're not doing the Art of Sane, we're doing more. It's your first try doing comic style art, and you're considering painting it well, but colours are so hard. How would I go about doing that? I'll show you how I would go about doing that, but it's probably not. In fact, I'll show you two different ways. So let's duplicate this. I think you could treat, if you want to color it, you could literally just color it. So I would set your line work to be like a multiply layer, and then on a layer underneath it, I go frog wants red pants, and I color it. And so the hard bit of the coloring isn't the technical act of coloring it, it's choosing the colors. Now it's so graphic that you want to be able to differentiate between these three characters, I would guess, is the main thing. I think it's going to be difficult for me in this tiny little feedback session to explain to you color theory and which colors you should or shouldn't choose that work well or don't work well together. Lots of different color schemes you could pick from. I think the main thing to bear in mind is just contrast and this idea that colors have value. So if I make it black and white, you can see right now the pants are actually much darker than they were without the color, right? Red is quite dark. But if I made the jacket like yellow, well, yellow's quite light compared with red. So color has chroma. And so you're contrasting value and color at the same time. Something to wrap your head around. It's kind of difficult. But that's a very conventional way of coloring him. And it's not a way that I enjoy. And so the way that I would do it is I would make a selection of anything in your image that is black, and then I would make a new layer with that selection. So you probably already have this, so you probably already have just a layer that is your lines. Then I'm not gonna do that. I clicked the wrong button and now Photoshop's opened Adobe Bridge. Let's get rid of that, please, 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 please. I am going to open up a painting that I did 2 years ago. Could be of anything. There you go, it's a Sergeant Study. And then I'm going to grab it. And I'm going to paste it. And I'm going to clip it to those lines. And it's like, wow, that's pretty interesting. And then underneath that, I'm going to do the same thing, but maybe I do it with a different painting. So this is another painting I did. Let's grab the whole thing. Let's paste it under that. Let's stretch it. Once it's stretched, I'm going to start grabbing it with something like a mixer brush and like messing it up. Plonk, 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 plonk. And then I'm almost going to use this to paint on top of. So the first thing that I might do is, I'm not going to do it very cleanly, is I might silhouette all the characters on some kind of a background. Now in this case that's probably going to be white, and let's just take this business guy as an example. So because I'm already painting on top of this mixer brushy mess that I've made, which is almost like an underpainting, I can just take a brush at fairly low opacity and I can say, well, his shirt is white. and I start colouring in, but I'm colouring in on top of this textury fun, and it is fun. His tie is red. His skin is different colour. Got a little bit of stubble. He's got a little bit of red. Maybe his ear gets a little bit more red. Maybe his suit is more of a grey navy. But I really enjoy that initial thing of like overlaying all this fun. And I think that helps me paint the thing. Obviously, I'm not a comic artist. I've never made a comic. I've never drawn in this style. I don't think I've ever read a comic other than the... it was an issue of the Simpsons magazine that had a comic in when I was a kid. So I don't really know what the convention would be that you would go for. If this is like a really graphic thing that you want on the front of a comic, I tend to find on the front covers of comics that I have seen, not read, that the front covers are much more painty and explorative, and actually it's the sort of grunt work inside where actually you wanna sort of get that repeatable process and work on that. But you can go a bit more interesting with the something like a front cover. But I kind of just like it black and white, you know. Maybe we put this guy on top at low opacity as well. In terms of the composition, which you also want feedback on, in fact, I'm going to put this in the feedback channel first. In terms of the composition, I think it's fine. I think I would be tempted to use a lot more of these shadow shapes a lot more liberally. So I'd say actually his legs casting quite a big shadow. You know, there's, as he's sort of bending in, maybe there's more of a shadow going across there. This guy stood behind the chair. Actually, maybe we silhouette his entire head in shadow. And it's interesting that the shadow doesn't necessarily have to be shadow. So it could just be that this is a black chair, right? And so I'm making it black. But the important thing isn't really the material of the chair. It's that I'm silhouetting that main character on something. You could go further. You could do it with the whole of the chair. He's literally sat on this big shape, this big void shape. But I don't know. Maybe that's overkill. I think it's kind of cool because nothing else in the scene is coloured in like that. And so, by comparison, it's interesting. We can still make out that it's a chair, even if it's just a simple shape. And actually, I think it makes it a little bit clearer that his like arms are going over the sides and stuff, when it's a dark shape cutting into a light shape. But I'm a painter. I don't do lines, and so if you ask me how I would make this better, I'm going to tell you that I would paint more of it, and I would work more with shape than with line. And that's my bias, isn't it? Same thing with this guy's tie. You know, could it be that this guy's tie is a dark shape? Could it be that his trousers are just dark. Maybe. But at the same time, I'm obliterating a lot of your information. Maybe that's the thing to bear in mind, is that you shouldn't be afraid of obliterating your own hard work. Like, do we need a lot of information on that part? I mean, you could put some information in with white if you wanted. Or can we block it in? I might be going too far. Way too far. But does what I'm saying make sense? That's what I want to know. You might disagree with the artistic direction that I'm taking it, which is fine. But it makes sense. Okay. I think the area that you're running into problems with, especially without that black, is like, that is mad. I think the reason that it's mad is because this shape is repeated evenly 4 times, and each time it's the same space away, it's the same thickness, and when I look at it at a glance, I don't know if I'm looking at arm, snake, smoke, or more snake. And so that's something to watch out for, is that sort of visual confusion. Now, separating stuff by adding in some of the chair, if I actually did it properly, still might not help all that much. Could it be that the smoke is like even wispier? And then maybe when the smoke gets out here, that turns into a dark shape or something, I don't know. That's very tricky. But, yeah. I will leave it at that before I lose my mind. I should look at more comic art. I think there's a lot of cool stuff out there, and a lot of really interesting use of shape and pose and composition and stuff. I ordered the Framed Ink book, if any of you have read that, and so I'm excited for that to arrive and for me to have a little read. And then I'll be able to help you more with this in the future, I suppose. Bonk. Let's group that. Who's next? Who's next? We had a few more people pile in. Let's just scroll back up and see if we can finish the people who were here initially. First, Art of Sane. Art of Sane has said, bonk. The colours seem wrong, and it feels weird how to have more interesting ideas or practice adding stories to art. That's difficult. Because it... So when you're studying art, it's like you're learning how to use tools, and how to express whatever you want with those tools. But in terms of figuring out what it is you want to express, that's a little bit more difficult. You could take this in loads of different ways. Is he himself a zombie? An Egyptian zombie? Is he a necromancer? You know, is this set in the modern day, and therefore, if this is set in ancient Egypt, if it's like an ancient Egyptian game or film or animation, and we see this guy, then we're going to think very differently about him than if it's set in modern day Britain and then you see him, right? So actually the world in which he exists is going to say something about his story. If it's modern day Britain, has he just like wandered out of a museum that he's risen from the dead in? Whereas if it's ancient Egypt, is he maniacal and he's trying to raise an army to take over the land? I mean, he might be doing that in both, to be fair. So it's context based. It's personal to you, thinking about the kind of story that you want. So that's right there. Now I can tell you about making things visually appealing. I think the colour is fine. I don't think it's as bad or as weird as you think it is. I think that there's something interesting going on that is not explained. So the way that I used to do a lot of history essays when I was growing up, because I still do have a great interest in history. And my history teacher, whenever he would read my work, would always say to me, if someone picked up your workbook in the local park and they were reading your essay, would they understand what it was you're talking about without having any context? And the answer was usually no. And so what he was trying to say is that every essay that I write should be self-sufficient, I guess. Like, within the essay, I should describe what it is I'm about to talk about, the context for the argument that I'm about to make, etc., etc. And I pose you the same question. If I'm presented with this character, or anyone is presented with this character without any of the context, like I was saying, like where's he from, blah, 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 can I tell what's going on? As far as I can tell, he's a maniacal Egyptian. The white eyes kind of imply that he's like demonic in some way, maybe. But the thing that I can't tell what's going on is he has like an orb. But the orb, I don't know what it is. I don't know what it does. I don't know if it's a being or a weapon or a tool. And I think the thing that would make that more obvious is how the character interacts with it. So characters interacting with the world around them is just one of the most powerful tools you're ever going to get. And I find it weird when, I guess it's no shade to know a lot. It's similar to this, where it's like, here's a character, and then here's a thing next to the character. Instead of having the two interacting in some way that explains their relationship, how they use each other. Obviously, you've corrected that in these two other drawings actually show how it's used, right? But those two other drawings aren't here. And so I'd like to see him, should he be like holding the orb? If it's a handheld thing, it at least says to the audience that he carries it around, that maybe it's something precious. Could the orb be like covered in chains or something? In which case maybe we assume that it's like a sentient being that he has trapped, you know, and he's using it for his own control, but actually it doesn't want to be used. And it's something that simple can tell maybe a bit more of that story. It could be that he's like staring into the orb, like it's giving him information, or he's talking to the orb. You know, he could be doing the old Shakespeare thing with the skull, where he's like, to be or not to be. He could be doing that. He could be like holding the orb out in front of him like he's walking a dog. It could be anything, but at the moment it's just there. So I'll stop coming up with weird ideas, and I'll let you do that. Could it be that the weird orb slots into something on his belt that gives him power, like it's a prison for the orb? I just don't know what it is. So I think about that. I'd maybe play more into this idea that he's asymmetrical, because he's a pretty creepy guy. And so you've got asymmetry here, but it's the only asymmetry that you have in the entire image. So he's got only going over one shoulder. Maybe that's only going over one shoulder because this shoulder doesn't have the crazy big plates. You know, maybe these chains or the bracelet circlet things, maybe again they're on this arm, but this arm is more free. Why is this arm more free? Well, maybe this is the orb arm. And he's holding that one. And maybe in this arm he has some kind of dagger or something, which says maybe he's about to stab the orb. I don't know. I think asymmetry is really strong and really fun, and especially for like a spooky character is pretty cool. Alternatively, you could do the opposite and you could just... What layer did I do that on? You could just take this and put it on the other side as well, and then he's perfectly symmetrical. And as soon as he's perfectly symmetrical, we kind of relate perfect symmetry with things like priests and religious orders and kings. Anything that's perfectly symmetrical is done so deliberately that this is a very deliberate person. So that's a direction that you could potentially go down. The devil eye is guiding him. Then yeah, maybe I would have him looking into it, or like maybe the devil eye sits on top of his crown or something, like it's hooked into his brain. But that should be obvious visually. I think I prefer something like that. I did a character drawing not long ago. That I'll bring up as a quick example of symmetry in a design. If I can find it. I pray that I can find it. There it is. It's a harpy hunter. And so the idea is that this arm has less armor because it's a bolus throwing arm, and so all that plate would get in the way, and then she throws the bolus, it downs the harpy, and then this arm is really armored because she sort of approaches it almost like a crab. She crab walks towards this harpy to kill it. And so you can imagine as she's being attacked by harpies, she's constantly sort of spinning and turning around to maneuver her armored side to face the enemy while her unarmored side is winding up and getting ready to throw this bolus. And that, so it's the asymmetry is saying something about the character and the function of the character, which I think is epic. So there you go. I will put this in the feedback channel. In terms of practicing adding stories to the art, I think that that's the cart before the horse sort of idea there. It's not that you should be adding the stories to the art, it should be that you are making art to describe the stories. And so maybe a good exercise for you would be to just come up with a story. I mean a short story, write a little short story about a character, and then see how well you can describe that visually. And then give it to someone else, your friend, and ask them, what do you think this character is? What do you think their personality is like? And see how close they get to the character that you were setting out to describe, basically. I think that'd be cool. Next is Joy. Joy has said, an old piece of Goliath barbarian with a bit of savage side to him. I was really wanting a night scene, but my value game isn't the greatest, so I went a bit light. I also do feel like the face could use an overall makeover. He's way too pretty for his charisma score. Good. You could use a critique on how to depict a night scene. And the wolf is supposed to be a spectral sort of spirit, which is really cool. Okay.
Hi.
Hello.
Hear me.
I think the thing that is going to make it feel more like a night scene is going darker. Darker and more monochromatic.
Okay.
So let's have a little science. We love science. So inside of your eyes, there are two different systems. And they're both very different ages. So, inside of your eyes, you have rods. These are rods. And you have cones. And those are cones. And the rods are really, really old. And they're used to detect light levels. And they're effectively black and white vision. So you can just see how light something is or how dark something is. And they evolved back when we were fish. So really, 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 really old. The cones are basically built on top of the rods. And they're much newer. And the cones separate light into visible colour. And so this is where we get our colour vision. And the most cool thing happens is when things go dark, we don't really use our cones. So when we're seeing in the dark, you use a lot more of the rods in your eyes than the cones, and everything goes black and white. So the next time that you are in the dark, which will be this evening, I assume, just get out of bed and don't turn the light on or anything. Just wait a minute to let your eyes adjust to the darkness. And you'll notice that pretty much everything in the room you're in, if it's dark, is black and white. It doesn't matter how colourful it is. You see in black and white when it's nighttime. And I think sometimes your brain sort of tricks you into thinking you're seeing in colour because you know what colour things are. But everything goes very, very monochromatic. So
I'll try this out.
so things like you've got these like crazy saturated blues. They're probably going to be reduced. These pants, really, that's like 94% saturated green. They're probably going to be reduced. The other huge thing in terms of the background is it's a nighttime scene, and so it should be dark. Like that. Right? The problem with it being dark, and you can see just by making it dark, this sort of appears less saturated even though it still is. The problem with it being dark is we can't see the character. So they have to be lit by something. I don't know, are you wanting them lit by a campfire? By a torch? By the moon?
The idea was the moon.
Okay. So moonlight is going to come from the top. I think moonlight is actually warm because it's a reflection of the light from the sun. People always make moonlight blue, but I think it's actually pretty warm. Let's... Bonk, 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 bonk. Bonk, 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 bonk. We can start pulling those in. Thinking about what's in light, what isn't in light. Maybe the axe, because it's metal, is going to get a much more direct reflection than anything else. You're going to get, just thinking about what planes are in light and what planes are in shadow. Top planes, whatever else. And brighten it up. We could play into convention and have everything be blue. So let's bum, 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 bum. So another way that we can darken it is we can just cover it in blue and then set that blue to something like multiply, and then we can alter the blue to be darker, less saturated. And then the coolest thing happens where if we take this blue that we've just made, this blue layer, and then we erase into it. I'm going to make a mask so that I'm painting into it, but it's the same thing as erasing into it. And you erase into it, all of a sudden you can separate your light from your shadow, right?
I didn't think about that. Thank you.
And then you can think about separating it. But I don't know. It's a bit funny. I don't think I've ever. Are you imagining that this is like a character sheet, or are you imagining it that it's like an illustration?
I was more taking it as a character illustration. Thing is that I suck at backgrounds. I'm only recently trying to learn more how to do backgrounds like landscapes and stuff. This actually, I couldn't wrap my head around like how light worked.
Okay. I think one of the other things that might help is that you're thinking about it currently. You're thinking about it like I have my character lit in a scene, and now I want to make it nighttime, rather than approaching it from a just this is what nighttime looks like, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right, so look, let's just go and Google. Is he like, what do you think? Forest, plains, mountain? Let's assume forest.
Yeah. I was more thinking forest. Sorry.
That's okay. I mean, that's a forest lit by a torch. Ooh, that's a forest. Okay, we've got a forest. Look at the kinds of colours that are in this. Maybe do a study of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And then
that's not a bad idea.
And then you could literally put your character on top or paint them in. And when you're painting them in, you can just sample colours that are already here. So if I want my character back here, well, I know they're going to be silhouetted. Like the trees are silhouetted. He's over there, plonk. But he's also going to be receiving some of that light from above, like from the moon. Right. But I'm just sampling colours that are already here. Notice that saturation thing again?
Mm-hmm.
Like there should be browns and greens and everything else here, and it's all grey. Because it's dark. But yeah, I think I get this a lot with the students I teach, where it's like I don't know how this works. I don't know how backgrounds or environments work. I would just go and look at them. I know that sounds obvious and maybe a little bit patronizing, but the best thing you can do is grab a couple of images. Maybe go out and take your own photos of a thing at night, a person at night. Do you have like any family members or friends or anything that you can get to pose at night?
Yeah, I have my partner. I can pretty much like, rotate it.
Get your partner in the back garden, if you have a garden, in the middle of the night, right, and see what that looks like. Study it, do a couple of paintings, see what kind of colors you're getting, what kind of values you're getting, and then try and apply that information to the thing from your head. Because I could tell you how I would make this nighttime, which I kind of started by doing. But I think what's probably more important is the idea that teaching you how to teach yourself when it comes to this kind of thing. Because it might be that for now it's nighttime, but next week you go, well, how do I put this character in a really hot desert? Well, you'd want to do the same thing. You'd want to look at images of people in deserts and see how strong the bounce light is coming from the sand, how sharp the shadows are depending on the strength of the sun, and that kind of a thing, and figure out that information for yourself and make notes on it. And treat it like you're a scientist. I almost really quite like this, where actually you just describe the character using just the shapes that are in light, and you lose a lot of the information that's in shadow. Maybe there's a little bit of shadow in there. I think that's cool. The other thing is the spirit wolf.
Mm-hmm.
You can. The tricky thing about this is what was your question? You wanted to know how it could feel a bit more like a spirit. Feel more spectral. I feel like it's the same problem again, where you're starting from a baseline. So the character is dark on light, so it's dark on a light background. That makes it feel like daytime. The spirit wolf is dark on a light background, whereas I feel like it would be light on a dark background. Maybe we can just...
Yeah, okay.
Just
I see what you mean.
But as soon as it's like light on a dark background, it feels more like people associate light and dancing lights with spirits. People tend to strongly associate like the Aurora Borealis and Northern Lights and things with spirits. And so maybe you want to play into that. Look at how the Aurora Borealis looks. Let's take this. Let's make it Aurora colored. And then let's blur it downwards. But before we do that, let's copy paste it. Then we'll blur it downwards, and then we'll set that blur to be like an overlay or something. Right. Does that seem more sort of spirity?
Yeah. That actually unlocked a few knowledge bits for me. Thanks.
Okay. So yeah, my advice is be an explorer and take photography that you're interested in and go, how does it work? Figure out how it works. And if you come back next week or the week after and you go, I took my own photography, I still can't figure it out, then I will happily give you another paint over. But I think you're going to get so much out of experimenting with this stuff and observing it in the real world first, rather than like using a Photoshop trick or something,
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. Who's next? E. I can't see people's full names, you see, because I'm in streamer mode, so you are just E to me, but that is your drawing, if that identifies you.
Hello.
Hello. Oh, it's another Chroma Core special.
Yeah.
We love Chroma Core. It's a whip of an Oni or ninja character that you're doing for Chroma Core. You're looking at how to simplify and better the design, especially the big sword. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's, I think I described it in another critique video, but I'm running on the assumption that you have not watched every critique video, so I will explain it here. So, if I have a little dude, here he is, little blue man, and then I have a little red man, and then I have a little green man. Which man is standing out the most to you? Which one's the most important?
None of them.
None of them. Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah.
Okay. But if now I give my green man a couple of buddies. And I give my blue guy a couple of buddies as well. Who's standing out now?
Yeah, the red guy.
The red guy, right, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that this problem, which is kind of I've got to coin a term for it, because I use this example so often and I don't even know what to call it. I think this exact thing is happening in your drawing, your design.
Yeah.
So, do
Just
you
too
want
many
me?
elements?
Well, not too many elements, but too many elements that are all trying to take the center of the stage. So, as an audience member, when I look at this, do you want me to look at the dragon? Do you want me to look at the red sword? Do you want me to look at the very fancy, like, drinking gourd? Do you want me to look at the crazy belt buckle? Or, like, the crazy rope? Do you want me to look at this sword? The tattoo? This hat's pretty crazy. And then there's like is this like a moth or a butterfly or something that's on the...
Yeah,
On the
butterfly, yeah.
Yeah, that's on the side of the hat. So, that's a lot. That is an
Yeah.
awful lot.
I know.
Yeah, and sadly, I think the solution is that you get rid of some of it. I don't think you can juggle them and make them work together. Let's take a comparable character from popular culture. If I can find a good image. This is the best image I can find. This is from 1998. Mulan.
Yeah.
Right? Mulan is really simple character design, because the dragon, much like your dragon, they decided that the dragon was the important thing that you should look at, and so is the little cricket, right? The sword isn't all that important, although it is her father's sword, but the design of it is not super crazy or eye-catching. And so for their costume, like, Mulan's just got a really simple ribbon and really simple sleeves and simple everything else. Even the hair is pretty simple. Can you imagine if you were watching Mulan and they gave her like a crazy hat with horns and also like a great big sword?
Yeah.
You just wouldn't know what to look at.
Yeah,
So,
I agree.
so which element do you want to keep?
I don't know.
You don't know. You got to pick. I mean, you
Yeah.
could do a couple. Did you do any like preliminary sketches for this, or is this the first sketch that you've done?
Yeah, it's the first sketch, yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's just a case of sketching a little bit more, doing a little bit of iteration, where you go, okay, so my first sketch of the character is gonna be the character, and they've got like the giant sword, right? I don't know what that arm's doing. Okay, but the main feature is the giant sword. So because I mean, it's a really simple sketch, but because everything else is really simple, at the moment, this sword is the thing that stands out, right? Or I could do a character that has normal size sword, but the thing that is important about the character is actually that they have a little pet dragon that they carry around with them. Well, now I'm looking at the dragon, and sure, I could have like an interesting belt buckle, but maybe it doesn't have like a full face on it. Maybe it's just like it's just a little bit more simple with the rope going around. That's something I can have. And maybe I can still have the hat, even. But it's definitely not going to have a butterfly on the back.
Yeah.
And if it
Just-
does, yeah, it's just a hat.
Yeah.
And if it does have those horns, maybe one of them isn't broken. Maybe it's just two horns, two simple horns. Like, that's something we can do. I really like the trousers and the shoes. I think you've done a really nice job of simplifying them. But like these two sketches have taken me a minute, maybe a
Yeah.
little bit more than a minute, and so that's how much time you can invest into doing a little drawing, just to see what it is that you're looking at. And if in this stage I go, no, I've gotten too busy, well, I know that it needs to be simpler, but I'm starting simple and then I'm adding on information. And every time I add something like the horns on that hat, I'm going to stop and I'm going to go, did I need to add those? Are they actually helping the character? Maybe it would be better without the horns on the hat. Maybe she shouldn't even have a sword. Like maybe the character is that she's just a character with a dragon, and actually in this hand she's got like what's the dragon's favorite food? Fish. We'll go with How to Train Your Dragon logic, and we'll say that the dragon really loves fish. Okay, well now we've got a little bit of a story. Is maybe she's like a fisherman's daughter, and she's found this dragon, and she's slopping around big buckets of fish, and therefore her costume doesn't need to be very crazy. The interest from it is not how detailed it is or how interesting it is. It's about the story of the character itself. Oh, the other thing that she's got is cape. Capes are always distracting.
Yeah.
So she could have a cape maybe, but
Yeah.
right. So I want you to do a load of little drawings like that, little teeny tiny drawings. Let me open up.
Definitely.
Let me open up some little sketches that I've done for a different thing. Okay, so here are a load of little sketches, and they're very, very similar to the ones that I just shown you. And in each of these, you can see it's kind of a similar thing where, like, I look at this guy, and the cool thing about his design is his hat. This guy's got a big satchel. This guy's got a big, like, water thing. This person has a big spear and, like, a cool shoulder thing. This guy's got a big mushroom hat. This guy's got a big thing on his back and a hat. But, like, a lot of the rest of it stays simple because it can stay simple. And then the next stage, I go in a little bit more detail with it. But again, I'm trying out so many different ideas at the same time. And in each of these, they're still fairly simple, apart from some central thing that they're interacting with or doing. And then that's the final character. And his thing is his boat. He's also got a mushroom growing out of his head. But even the mushroom, story-wise, it's important. But here it's like the same value as his skin. It's not that crazy. The main thing is he's got a big, I call it a propagation boat. Because he's a gardener, and so that's a central theme with his character. And everything else can be a bit more simple. You know, his pants are a little bit more simple. His clothing's a little bit more simple. He is meant to be sort of regal, so it's a bit complicated. His hair's a bit more simple. Pick one thing and then build everything else around that one thing. I think that would be,
that makes sense.
yeah. But don't be afraid to do little sketches. Especially for like a chroma core submission. This is give it
Yeah, this isn't like my. I did other sketches, but like for different ideas. Like, but like I wanted like kind of color it and kind of see how it looks. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you've got like feature creep at the moment, where you all of these features are coming into your head and you're adding them all.
Yeah.
So just slow on down and decide what's important to the character and what isn't. I guarantee you all of your favorite characters from games have one thing that people go, that's the person with the big sword, or that's the person with the pet butterfly, you know.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
So find their one thing.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, thank you for the feedback.
You're welcome.
It was very helpful.
I think that's it. I think you were the last person who asked for any feedback.
Yeah.
If anyone else is in the the stream or is in the Discord and would like some feedback, let me know. You have not long to let me know before I decide to go and eat my dinner. But it's been a pleasure. It's always fun seeing all the different bits and bobs, pieces of work that people make. And it's always interesting balancing giving feedback with inserting my own opinions about what something should or shouldn't look like. Because I'm worried that maybe you do want a really crazy character that's got like everything on it. And maybe that could be cool, and maybe some people would really like that, but it's not my taste. But that doesn't mean that it couldn't work and that it wouldn't be interesting, you know. Okay, I think I'm going to end the stream. It doesn't seem like anyone else is asking, and if they do, you can get it next week. So thank you all for coming. A reminder to those people watching the VOD later on, that this kind of feedback I do once a week in the public Discord server, which you can join. The link should be in the description. But if you want feedback more than once a week and you don't want to queue up in a load of people and have it done live on stream, you can head over to my Patreon, where we have a critique session in the Patreon. Basically, whenever you like, I will run a critique session, and so you get critique on tap, free of charge. Well, it's not free of charge. You're paying for the Patreon, but you get the point. Right.